hopefully when you see what empiricism assumes, it'll be obvious to you that, hey, wait a second, this is basically what I've been being taught in science class growing up. This is more the point of view that I've been taught is true about how we get knowledge, how we justify, observational beliefs, and as I said, if the rationalist view that somehow reason gives us a special deep in to the nature of things seemed a little unusual to you. If Descartes' claim, and really Plato had the same claim that in order for something to be knowledge, it's got to be absolutely certain beyond a doubt. If you say, well, there's lots of things that we claim to know that don't have that kind of certainty attached to them. Hopefully you recognize that empiricism is a view that you've been taught to be much more comfortable with. But the thing is, many of the views that are pervasive now, the kind of relativism that there are a lot of students, and you may be one of them, who are subjectivists. They don't think that, and they teach this a lot in the school system, that, oh sure, we can have some objective opinions about observable things, but when you get into the realm of faith and values, nothing's really it's all a matter of one person's opinion against another. Nothing can be really objectively justified. Well, those kinds of cynical, skeptical views date back to what happened with the empiricists. In other words, you can understand a lot of what makes your culture what it is and why it's different from things 100 years ago if you understand what went on with the empiricists. So, as I mentioned, I've done quite a bit of work in this area. I've been over the British Isles twice, once in '85, once in '95, giving papers and commenting on them. So I like to teach these guys, but when you look at this PowerPoint, the key is to not get bogged down in all of the detail, but it's going to seem like these guys are just examining the leaves on the trees. They're making really picky little fine distinctions, and what does any of this have to do with my life? Why don't we get back to interesting stuff like whether we have a soul, whether we have free will, whether there's any objective justification for moral beliefs, or whether it's all relative, whether there's a God. Well, the point is, where these views led was in a direction that goes back to the kind of skepticism that Descartes was trying to get away from. And it challenges beliefs in all those other areas. So what goes on here is not irrelevant to some of the more, juicy topics of philosophy, but it's extremely relevant. So the three empiricists that really put this philosophy on the map for good are Locke, Berkeley, and Hume. John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume. And as I think I said last time, We call them the British empiricists because all three of them are from the British Isles. John Locke from England, again Berkeley from Ireland, and David Hume from Scotland. Nobody from Wales. So we call them the British empiricists. Again, this PowerPoint was made up from a different text than yours. I forget, maybe there is a quote or two from yours, but empiricism, the philosophy that depends that all knowledge comes from experience. That is, if there's something we know, then we learned it after we were born from experience. Another definition that I had in a different text, an empiricist maintains that we can know something if we can justify it with respect to what we see, hear, smell, touch, or taste. In other words, if we can confirm our belief by using our five senses. Now, if we do that directly, and I'm not going to spend much time on this little distinction in these next two slides, but the beliefs we get directly are called basic empirical beliefs. In other words, you and I have a basic empirical belief about what we see going on us in the room, about there being a briefcase sitting on the table there, right? So seeing a red telephone produces in me the belief that there is one in front of me, and so my seeing the telephone justifies my belief that it is there. Now, if I teach long enough, I was asked by one of my backgammon players, and I still went to backgammon Monday night. What can I say? When you run the club, you kind of got to show up. Are you retired yet? I said, I'm an adjunct professor. I can't afford to retire. But if I teach long enough, I'm going to show a slide like this, and somebody's going to raise their hand and say, well, where's the telephone? You're talking about a telephone in this slide, but I don't see a telephone. In other words, telephones like this are going to be something that a lot of students just don't even have experience with at some point. Well, we can also have indirect or inferential empirical beliefs. But these we trace back to what our senses, the information our senses give us. In other words, Jurassic Park is still science fiction, right? Nobody's cloned a dinosaur yet that we know of. But, so no one's directly seen a brontosaurus. Well, how is it that we're so sure that they once walked the earth? Well, from evidence that we have from things like fossil footprints of those dinosaurs and fossilized skeletons, we infer that they once lived and walked the earth. So our belief that there once were brontosauruses, living, breathing, huge animals, is inferred from empirical, from evidence that our senses acquire, right? It's with our senses that we see fossils, that we see fossilized footprints. So inferential empirical beliefs then are beliefs that are not about what's directly observable, but are inferred from things that are directly observable, like fossils and footprints. Well, empiricism is a very attractive view on knowledge. And as I said, I mean, it pervades most of modern science today. You probably haven't had a science class where your professor was trying to argue that you knew some of the laws of nature, when you came into this world, like rationalists might claim. So beliefs based on empirical evidence seem reliable and objective for everyday life in the sciences. Right. But this is a view that has led down the garden path back to skepticism, even though Descartes tried to get us out of skepticism. Now, one of the things I like to do is to point out why the empiricists could not take Descartes' way out. Number one, how did Descartes get out of skepticism? Well, and again, if you weren't there, the Integrity Files there, he relied on what he thought were his innate ideas. He says the cogito ergo sum, the I think therefore I am, is my one example of a statement that's absolutely certain and true. And that's what knowledge needs to be. Do I have any other ideas, concepts in me that are innate and that are just as certain? And lo and behold, Descartes finds that he has this innate idea of God as possessing the typical qualities of God in the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? All-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect, benevolent, merciful, what have you. And Descartes basically tries to get back what he questioned regarding the material world and whether we're in a dream or deceived by a demon, or whether we can rely on those beliefs. In other words, Descartes tries to get us out of skepticism in the end by trying to prove God's existence via arguments like the ontological argument, which we covered earlier in the class. And so he says, if I've proved God's existence, and I've proved that as part of God's nature, God is morally perfect, God would be less than morally perfect. He would be deceiving me himself if he made me such that I think there's a real table here from what my senses tell me, and there isn't. He's either letting me be deceived by the demon, or I'm dreaming all this. But Descartes says, I've just proved that God is morally perfect, and he exists, and he's so he can't be a deceiver if he's morally perfect. So God has not made me so that I'm deceived in what my senses tell me when they tell me there's a real table here. And so he tries to get back the other things he questioned, well, why can't the empiricists rely on a similar way out? Well, because, for one thing, the empiricists say we do not have any knowledge at birth. We have no what were called innate ideas. There is no innate knowledge. What Plato and Socrates thought about our having knowledge when we're born, what Descartes and the other rationalists, Spinoza and Leibniz, who we're not covering, thought about God putting innate knowledge into us at birth, is wrong. Well, see, for John Locke, that's what the mind is at birth. It's a blank slate. It's a blank tablet. So, and it's only after birth that we get knowledge. So the rationalists could not, the empiricists could not use the rationalist way out because they rejected one of the main assumptions of rationalism, and that is that we have some very reliable, certain knowledge built into us at birth. They say, no, we don't. Mind's a blank slate. If we know anything, it comes from the experiences we have after birth. Now, there's another reason, and I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but there's another reason why they could not use Descartes' way out, and that's what was called the Cartesian circle. I'm just mentioning this in passing. I'm not going to take a lot of time with it. In logic, have any of you taken logic already? Okay, we have a logic class in here before we meet. We teach people that what is called a circular argument is not a good argument. It assumes what it's supposed to be proving. So that's what we call reasoning in a circle. You've already assumed your conclusion in your premises, so your reasoning is circular. Here's the Cartesian circle in a nutshell. You could say, Descartes, you're telling me that clarity and distinctness is the mark of a necessary true truth, because that's the mark of truth in the I think, therefore I am, in the cogito, ergo sum. Why should I think that something that's clear and distinct is necessarily true? And in other words, we could challenge Descartes with saying that. And Descartes would say, well, you know what? There is a God who exists and guarantees that the propositions that are clear and distinct, that I perceive clearly and distinctly, like the cogito, like my necessary idea of God, God guarantees, because he's no deceiver, that what I clearly and distinctly perceive is necessarily true. But then you could go on to say, I'm not writing this down, but you can always replay this right in 10. Well, yeah, but Descartes, why should I think that there is a God who's no deceiver, who guarantees the truth of what I clearly and distinctly perceive? And Descartes would say, well, because I can prove that the existence of a God who is no deceiver from my necessarily true, clear, and distinct ideas. Like my idea of God. Y'all see what's going on there?
So, is it the Cartesian circle because Descartes, like, he can be questioned, but he can also give an answer, and it can just continuously be questioned?
Well, the point is, he needs God to exist and be no deceiver in order for him to be confident that what he perceives clearly and distinctly is necessarily true. And he needs those ideas to be necessarily true in order to prove that there's a God who exists and is no deceiver. So the whole thing runs in what we call a vicious circle. You need one to get the other, so you're basically assuming both sides of the argument. And this was called the Cartesian circle. So another reason why the empiricists rejected Descartes' way out is that the whole thing was one big circular argument that basically didn't prove anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I just looked it up, and it said it's a circle. This is just someone's opinion, but it said it's a circle of contradiction and beliefs by Rene Descartes.
Well, it's okay. It's not necessarily a contradiction, but the point is, you need one to be true to prove the other, and you need the other to be true to prove the first statement. And so the whole thing runs in a big circle, and it proves nothing. And so here are the empiricists, and they cannot take Descartes' way out of skepticism. But, as we're going to see, they do accept Descartes' view that what our mind is immediately acquainted with is not something directly on the outside of us, but what our mind perceives directly is its own inner experiences. And the problem with that is showing that those inner experiences aren't a dream, aren't something you're deceived with, refer to anything outside, anything beyond themselves. And the empiricists' views ended up in skepticism because they couldn't do it. So problems with perception then have been a part of empiricism. So here's what I just said. John Locke rejected the rationalist claim that we have some knowledge at birth. This was called having innate ideas. Now, he didn't just reject it out of hand, okay? There are 4 books in Locke's main book on this, the essay concerning human understanding. And Locke takes the better part of one of those 4 books to argue against the view that we have innate knowledge. Now, we're not going to go into that. We can't cover everything. This is intro. Remember, all of these courses, you know, if we were a larger 4-year school with, upper graduate, upper class philosophy majors, we don't even have a minor program in philosophy, unfortunately. We tried to get one. But the point is, you would be able to take a whole semester course in nothing but British empiricism. You'd be able to take a whole semester course in rationalism, or in the philosophy of religion. Most of these topics we're covering in intro are ones where at the upper division level, whole semester courses are taught over them. So we can't cover everything. But for Locke, so he didn't just blatantly say there are no innate ideas. He tried to argue that in a whole book. So for Locke, and the phrase he used was a Latin phrase, a tabula rasa. Now look, I never took Latin. You know, I used to wonder when I was growing up, how come there weren't any kids in public school with long Polish names like mine? Well, what I didn't realize is all those Polish Catholic students were, you know, across 5 blocks away at St. Thomas's Catholic School. Say, how come you're not a Polish Catholic? Because I come from a long line of Slovak Baptists. 3/4 of my lineage was Slovak. And at any rate, so we were Protestants. In fact, one of the reasons why my people came over here was persecution by the Catholics in Poland and Czechoslovakia at the time of Protestant religious views. So Locke says, our mind's a blank slate or a blank tablet, and what writes on that tablet? Experience with our 5 senses. So here it's worth, look, don't get bogged down in the specifics of what's going on in the next few slides, but get the main point here. If you claim that we don't have any innate ideas of things that don't seem to be around in this world, right? Of perfection. Remember, Socrates argued that there's nothing that's perfectly equal. How do we know? How can we judge that some 2 lines are equal but not perfectly equal in this world? Well, because we must have been acquainted with perfect equality when our soul knew the forms more intimately before birth. Or for somebody like Descartes, God puts those innate ideas of perfection, our idea of God, ideas like infinity. So, if you're an empiricist and you say, no, we ain't got no innate ideas, somebody should have said, he didn't really say we ain't got no. I just make a point. If you're saying there are no innate ideas, then it's incumbent on you to provide some explanation for how it is that we seemingly have concepts about things where there are no instances in this world, where we don't have direct experience of what is infinite, or of what is perfect, or of God. And so the empiricists tried to do this. And the idea is, and this is weird. This was one of the first PowerPoints I ever did when I did them. And I was working with something like PowerPoint 97 back then. And this was right side up. And in every successive version of PowerPoint from 2000 on, this little graphic gets turned upside down. You know, it's also a pretty old computer. But what he's trying to say is, we start out with something imperfect, and our own rational abilities can work on it and kind of extrapolate out from what is imperfect to ideas that are beyond what our senses tell us. So, I mean, suppose I'm not real crazy about this, but we start out with something that's imperfect, we remove the imperfections. I think a better illustration would be a perfect rose, right? Start out with a rose that's imperfect. It's got some blotches on it. It's got a few misshapen petals, maybe a missing one here and there. And then you remove the imperfections. Now imagine a rose that doesn't have any blotches on it, doesn't have any misshaping petals, has all of its petals intact, you know, and you know, so you remove the imperfections mentally, and you arrive at a concept of what a perfect rose would be. And this is basically what he's saying. Here I say, well, I have an imperfect knowledge of computers, but I could remove the imperfections and get a concept of what having a perfect knowledge of them would be. I'm not real crazy about that illustration. But, so take a concept of limited space. That is something that our senses put us in touch with, right? So how do we get an idea of unlimited, infinite space? Or of duration in time? You know, we know what it is to have a 50-minute class, right? A 50-minute duration in time. Or a number of things. The idea is we imaginatively repeat and compound these ideas endlessly. So from our experience, say, of a body moving in limited space, we can imagine a body moving through infinite space. So do you see what the empiricists are saying? They're saying, look, we don't need to have gained these ideas either at birth or before birth. After we're born, just our reasoning powers is all we need to formulate ideas that don't seem to relate to anything our senses put us in touch with in this world. So this is just another way of saying we don't need innate ideas. Our minds can form by themselves the kinds of ideas that Plato and Socrates thought had to be innate. You know, that's, you know, some robocall, somebody got a hold of that number. And I mean, there's any number of people who use this room. It's probably for somebody who no longer uses it, at any rate. So I don't even pay attention to it anymore. But I don't want the thing to keep on ringing. Okay, so again, you know, don't get bogged in the detail here, but see what their project was trying to do. They're trying to explain how we can have these ideas without there being innate, right? So remember, for Descartes, our idea of God was put into us by God. He even has a separate argument trying to say that his idea of God is so perfect that it needed a cause that was as perfect as the idea itself, and that cause was not found in him because he's just a poor sinner saved by grace. He's not perfect, so he can't cause that himself to have that perfect idea of God, nor was it caused by anything around him. It had to have a cause as perfect as the idea itself, and the only cause for him that's as perfect as his perfect idea of God is God himself as the cause of that idea. So he argued God must have put that innate idea of God in me at birth. Whereas Locke, who by the way was a Protestant Christian, but he just thought, well, we don't need to assume that our idea of God came to us innately. You know, so what he's trying to say is, if we extrapolate from things we do know, like limited existence, contingent existence, we get some idea if we extrapolate it out of what necessary existence would be like. Duration in time, we say God is eternal. Well, there again, we extrapolate out these. We know what it is to have limited knowledge of something, so we can construct the attribute of God as having unlimited, omniscient knowledge. We know what it is to have limited power. We can extrapolate that out to omnipotence and, limited wisdom, infinite wisdom. So, you see what Locke is saying is, even our idea of God does not have to be innate like Descartes and the other rationalists claim. Okay, so they provide an alternate story of this. I took more time, but it's worth taking time with Locke, because if you see what's going on with Locke, you can understand it. And what I'm going to do, because there's only a few minutes left, and I didn't get as far as I wanted, but I wanted to make some of these points to kind of orient you, because otherwise this stuff gets so tedious. You wonder, why on earth are these people making all these distinctions? So I'm trying to give you some idea of why. And again, that's why we're tegredying these things. If some of it goes by, you can always replay. You can stop the tape. Remember, you can speed up a tegrity recording so that it doesn't take a half an hour to listen to what was a half an hour lecture or 45 minutes. You can play it in a lot less time. So this is what we're going to look at next time. The key to understanding Locke and the empiricists is that they use the word idea as a technical term. In other words, they give it a specialized, specific meaning that is not the one that you would find in a dictionary. Remember, all dictionaries do is look at how relatively educated people use words and try to pick out a definition from the way people actually use words. They don't make definitions themselves. They try to generate a definition that just reflects how people are using the word. But there's another type of definition where you invent a new way of using a word. And that's what Locke and the empiricists have done with the word idea. Locke defines it as relating to whatever we experience. Whatever we experience with our five senses or from reflection on what's going on inside of us, for Locke, gets to be an idea. So we'll start it next time with this. But again, these are there. Folks, I made the extra credit file visible to you. I did some tweaking of it. I still want to add some more things because I found some more options that you might find interesting. Again, normally to get the extra credit, you view the video and write half a page to a page, and it can be written longhand. Just on some of the things that stuck out to you when you read it or when you watched it. Doesn't have to be a detailed summary, and you turn it into me, and I give you 10 points. I don't grade the extra credit. If you do at least the minimum on it, you get the 10 points. Okay, on it. But I'm going to add some more options because some of the ones that I had in there just aren't any good anymore. So, Okay, a couple of people had their hands up. So, okay. Test 2 is a week from Monday, so Monday we'll give you a sheet of take-home essays. Monday, as in Monday coming up. Test 2 is on November 2nd, which is a week from Monday. Okay, thank you for coming. If somebody tends to roll, if you missed it, sign it on the way out. And if anybody needs one, let me shut this off.